This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In this episode, we're talking to Shauravi Malik, the co-founder of Wholesome Foods, the company behind Slurrp Farm. Shauravi is a Cambridge graduate with an impressive background in finance before transforming her passion for healthy children's nutrition into a thriving business venture. You'll hear about her transition from finance to entrepreneurship, how her personal journey as a mother shaped her business decisions, and her insights into creating nutritious food products that children actually enjoy eating. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you with us. So I wanted to start out with your transition. You moved from finance to food. What inspired you to take such a significant career change?
The truth is, I saw a movie called Food Inc. And I think I really like Michael Pollan a lot as a writer. And over time, I read his books. And I also had to think about food for my goddaughter who was coming over. And I realized I didn't have the faintest idea. I didn't have kids at the time. It was many things, I had left finance, but I was working for the Virgin Group, Richard Branson, in his family holding company. And the reason that move happened was all the billions were just zeros after a while. And I liked my job. I was good at it. But it just felt like money always. And I felt, what will I do in my life? And then when I went to Virgin, I saw people doing really awesome things in terms of like really following their heart and starting all kinds of businesses, right? There was everything that had already been done. But there was also this like real love for, one day I want to go to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The next day I want to go to space. And I think I got a really very nice sense of how businesses really are in the whole organic sense. Because in finance, I saw one part of it, but I was such a small part of a very big company. And then here, it was a very big company, but I could see the heart of it in terms of everything that happened from all the different functions. And then I fell in love with understanding how food works. And so that's what led to that journey. I started eating better. My mom is an amazing cook, so that food thing was always there at home, and that's what inspired the change.
And so those experiences obviously influenced you, but how did they influence the approach to building Slurrp Farm?
Part of me was that I want to work in India. I've lived in London since 2004. At the same time, when I thought about what I want to do in food, and I met Meghna, who is my work wife and much better half. She was in London at the time and was at McKinsey when I first met her, and then went back to India to start the public health practice at McKinsey India. And she was like, I'm seeing that just kids are not well nourished across the spectrum. Doesn't mean that you have to be wealthy or not wealthy. And so that led to this conversation, both of us being interested in food and seeing when Meghna had her daughter, Nandita, was when I think it really came home, because she said, there's really nothing I want to feed her. And I had, the year before had done this whole goddaughter journey and been reading. And so I was sending her food back. And then all my friends in India were asking me to bring children's food for them. And part of me thought, like, there's so much food in India. Why am I doing this? It felt like something that was worth doing. It felt like a big, wide open gap, because I didn't want to do something that had micro impact. And so the approach to it was to say, if you can change how young children eat in the early stages of their life, you can really change all of what comes after. And so that was sort of the heart of it. And it still is, like, when you see in our office, the vision is to change how the world eats. And it starts with kids. And I think that if you change how children eat in the first 1,000 days of their life, they really never develop the palate to eat junk, because your whole taste mechanism in your body changes. So I think that's the big part of what we try to do. It's been almost 10 years into the journey. So at a small scale, but getting there.
You realized that there was this gap in the market of healthy children's food. What were some of the early challenges that you were faced when you were launching Slurrp Farm?
I think we did a total pivot. And I think, like many entrepreneurs, we came at it from here's something that exists elsewhere. Let's make the same thing in India. So we tried to make fruit and vegetable purees. We never launched it, but we spent about 2 years trying to make that product perfect. And then realized that nobody in India wants to feed their children like that. And actually, it's a good thing because we would have made something that people would use only when they travel, because fruit and vegetable is fairly easily available and people like to feed that to their children fresh. And I think that when it comes to children and newborns, people prefer to look at like grains when they eat outside the house. And I think what that led to was discovering this amazing culture of traditional grains like millets, but also lentils, legumes. I'm staring at the beans guy, but not beans for little kids yet. But understanding all of those in the diet and realizing it's missing on the shelf. So there was no grain diversity, And so it led us to discovering that and experimenting with that. I think what it also did was that we make only things we would give our own children. And I, maybe as a mother, realized I never fed my kids fruit and veg that had been sitting in something for like a year. It felt better to do that. But I would say it was a big journey in learning that.
It's an interesting journey. So when you were doing the product development, how did you kind of balance this kind of challenge of nutrition and taste?
People laughed at us a lot because, I'll say it, I actually can't eat certain things or eat at weddings or outdoor venues anymore because I went to see the back end of how that is made. And actually, when I went to a cookie factory for the first time, I really can't eat like commercial cookies because most of them, they have no butter, no sugar. Everything is like a liquid compound mixed into flour. And so when we were trying to make our first cookie, we broke a lot of rules in some way because I think what's happened with food is when you go into a factory, which is where food is made, it's become so industrial that when you look at the process and you say, how do I inject some of what I would do in my home kitchen back into this process? None of the chain can support you. Because when we first started, we'd go to food technologists and they'd say, well, you need snap and crackle and, the sound has to be a certain way, which you can only do if you have XYZ thing in it, which we didn't want to use. And so the lines that are set up at scale couldn't deal with what we were trying to do as a recipe. I think that was the hardest part. How to take what works in the kitchen at home and you have a recipe you like and how to make it at scale. And then we met Tanya, who's heading R&D and does product at Wholesome Foods. And she's someone who'd done that in the US for almost 20 years and had moved back. So our paths crossed. And I think that really helped us. That really helped us because she was able to do that thing where she was like, she got the intent and she got the science of it. And mostly people had one or the other, if that makes sense, right? If you were like a very typical food technologist, you'd say, well, you have to do it this way. And I think it was really nice because there's someone who could marry both ends.
How have you seen consumer preferences change in this children's food space over the years as well?
I think that a lot has changed in the last decade of how people approach food. I'd say our own fears are different. Because when we started, our big fear was, no one's going to think that we are yummy enough. And so we used to spend a lot of time thinking about how do you show yummy. And I think our rule has always been we won't make something if it doesn't taste good. Because if it doesn't taste good, it's going to lie in your kitchen shelf and no child is going to eat it. I think COVID really accelerated the understanding around how you have to think about health differently. I wouldn't say it's done that at a grand scale, but I think it's made things a lot easier. And so our promise to ourselves was we will not make products that don't taste great because no one chooses health over taste. But I think that understanding of health, as you know, over the last 5 years has gotten a lot better. And so people are willing to make the sort of compromises that eating healthy does need.
So what advice would you give parents struggling to find healthy food options for their kids?
Feeding children healthy is really about often the parents' relationship with food and how willing you are to stay the course. And so a lot of times when we give into junk food, it's this fear of like, they won't eat enough, or it's going to take a lot of my time to like deal with making something that is not full of sugar or full of stuff that's going to make them eat it more easily. And you have to tell yourself they're going to eat. So if you stay at it, kids actually develop the ability to eat healthy. And actually, many times, if you stay at it, it gets harder when they're in school and there are other kids telling them that's not great. So I think the advice is to really not be too stressed that your child is going to go hungry, because they're not. And when we're hungry, we'll eat. And to stay with like feeding them healthy and doing your best at it. I think the other thing is children can actually eat what adults eat fairly early on. So you don't have to make different meals forever. But I do think children snack more, and you have to be planned and prepared for those moments, because there are many more micro eating because they're just jumping around so much more in the day. So I would say plan for the snacking, because that's where it actually goes wrong.
So how, as a parent, has your own personal sort of journey as a parent influenced the work that you do as a company?
So for a long time, we would literally make products as our kids were growing older. So if you see, we started with the cereals, then we had pancakes, then they started growing older. And I remember being at a holiday in Uti, and my son was like, why am I never allowed to eat the breakfast cereals? So then we were like, well, let's make a nice breakfast cereal. Then we did snacks that they can take in the bus to school and all that. So I think for a while it was really following our lives, and what we saw as need gaps was pretty typical. And today, what that means is there is no product that goes without the filter of looking at the back of the pack and making sure that I'm fine to eat that myself or give it to my family. And that comes out in very small ways. For example, last year in India, we had this controversy around how a lot of spices are basically cleaned with ethanol, and that is not always very good for adults as well. And we sort of knew that, and thanks to Tanya, we had always said that we will steam treat the spices that go into all of the flavorings or the puffs or the snacks, right? Or noodles, for example. And we will follow EU protocol, so what EU standards are for food. And it's small things, it doesn't have even a massive price impact. But I think it's that level of like doing the second level of care, because I don't think the consumer even knew. It's not something we market, but it's just something that we really stick by, saying it has to work, and knowing every level of detail into what goes into what we make.
So what's next for Slurrp Farm?
What's next for Slurrp Farm is actually Mile. So we started an adult brand, and that started because there were a lot of adults who call our customer care line, and there were a lot of gym bros who would call our customer care, and we realized it was because they were either trying to eat gluten-free, and we don't market ourselves as a gluten-free brand, but almost 90% of what we make is gluten-free, apart from the noodles, which have whole grain wheat in it. And so that was led to that understanding that there's a gap there. And so we're having fun with that. And I think Mile is about making adults eat better diversity of food. And what's new for Slurrp Farm is to really try and see, we started with a whole bunch of different products. And the idea is to see where can we really be market leaders or gain market share in 2 or 3 different categories, and be super able to hit and make a real difference to how people are eating at a bigger scale in certain categories. So you may not be able to win in 10 ways or the whole diet of a child, but can we get breakfast and say snack time right? And then assume that the main meal is something that's still working out in the home, and then we'll provide noodles for it, but like you cannot win all categories.
So your product uses millets a lot and lots of different grains, but how do you see the healthy food industry evolving in the next few years? What are some of the big things?
So, what's interesting is that the time span between what is healthy food across the globe becoming sort of a universal trend, and you see this because you travel so much, is shortening. How I see it evolving, and you've played a role in this, right, is people are seeing that eating monocultures of one type of grain or one type of fruit and vegetable is not a good idea. So at the one end, it's like it's really gone bazooka, and there's a lot of fancy food happening. But I think at the other end, there's a lot of understanding around just trying to eat less ultra high processed food. And I think that legislation is coming to support that in most countries as well. And I think the whole understanding of mental health, long-term health outcomes, and food is only getting stronger. And so governments will make the change that people are also starting to do in their own lives. And I think, funnily, Instagram has been a big part of that, right? Because Insta Lives is making everybody want to look a certain way. And I think that is leading a big change in how people eat. Now, how that interacts with things like semaglutide and things I don't know, because that's almost like a shortcut to eating healthy. So I can't predict where that's going to go. But I think the understanding of like better diet, good gut. I also don't know where this whole protein trend is going to go. That's an interesting one.
I think there's an obsession with protein at the moment. There's different parts of the world have different needs around protein, but there's many parts that are obsessed with protein that don't have a protein problem. And then there's parts of the world that should be getting more protein that aren't. I hope that levels out a little bit more too.
Yeah, I'd love to understand what you mean by that. You can tell me more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think there's a lot of obsession with protein that's driven, I think, a lot through protein is needed for driving muscle growth and thus health.
Is that even true?
No.
Yeah. And how come nobody's saying that loudly?
Well, this is when you talk to nutritionists, they say, the majority of people have more than enough protein in their diets. Unless you're actively doing muscle building, weight training. Somebody used the analogy of it's like storing up bricks, just putting them in a pile, but not actually using them to build muscle. And so that's kind of, in many ways, I see that as wasted. But then fiber, if you look at fiber challenges in this country, where in the UK, the amount of the population getting fiber is the right amount of fiber is dismally low. And so fiber, and this is that protein over carbs kind of conversation which happens. So it's quite challenging. But anyway, that's probably another episode, but we can talk a little bit about that. But this idea of the future and thinking about what's evolving and what are these trends is really critical to the work you're doing. In children's nutrition, what do you hope is the future?
I think in children's nutrition, it's also really important to get micronutrients right and the balance of it, and to get it from your diet versus always having it as a pill. It's not clear what your body can even absorb. And even with having it in your diet, having it in ways that your body is getting it. So I think that thinking about diets like that is pretty critical, because I think it impacts everything, right? If you're deficient in one thing and your diet is eating everything else, then you're likely to struggle in life. So I think nailing that correctly is very important.
I mean, that is exactly the point about the macronutrients versus micronutrients. And what do we often focus on is this protein, but then we might be missing certain key things that are absolutely essential building blocks, and they prevent us developing, and particularly for kids.
And actually, when you miss them, it can go quite wrong. Like if you're not sorting calcium and iron out, or if you're not getting fiber right and eating just fruit and vegetable every day and thinking, I'm actually eating really healthy, but I'm missing this entire, my kid doesn't like vegetables, it can go off. So I think with children, diversity and micronutrients are probably the two things I would always focus on.
No, I'm a big fan of dietary diversity. I think to me, it's mitigating risk. To me, it's like you eat more diversity, you've got less chance of missing something.
100%. Also, if you're allergic and you don't know it, and we can all have minor allergies to things, right? Yeah. If you cycle through different types of food, then you're less likely to, be eating the same thing. And I'll tell you something, I realized later in life that I'm allergic to Brussels sprouts, and I love Brussels sprouts.
So talking about food, one question I like to ask everyone is, what is your favorite food?
Oh, that's an easy one. I have many favorite foods, but the thing that makes me smile always is something my mother used to make when I was small, and it never goes out of fashion. It's like a very South Indian dish. It's called Anna Saru Kospalya, which means it's rice, and it's like a sambar, but with a lot more lentil, and then it's cabbage with coconut, and which is the vegetable, and it's so good. And then you have to have it with really hot ghee, and then you have to get your mom to mix it with her fingers.
The fingers are the key ingredient.
Yes,
I can
they are.
Oh, it's amazing. It's so great to talk to you today, and thank you for joining us on this show.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.